Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
We have two guests today on the Cognitive Crucible. First is Dr. Paul Lieber, who is Peraton's Chief Data Scientist for its Cyber Mission Sector and Associate Research Faculty at the University of Maryland's Applied Research Lab in Intelligence and Security, or ARLIS. Second is Janis Butkevics, who is a Senior AI Subject Matter Expert at Peraton. Paul Lieber and Janis Butkevics, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John. Awesome to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
And also to our audience, Paul is a return guest. He was last on the Cognitive Crucible way back at the beginning, episode number 9, and we'll have a link to his previous discussion in the show notes. But he was on at that time with Mike Jackson, where they discussed an article that they co-authored entitled, "Are We Our Own Worst Enemy?" And so I suggest to our audience to go back and check that out. And like that previous episode, the conversation that we are going to have today will cover another co-authored piece entitled "Searching for AI Best Practice in the Department of Defense." And the subtitle for this piece is "The Great Camp Divide and Lessons from a Commercial Setting." And we will have a link to this article in the show notes for people to go and check it out if they like. So, fellows, before we get into your article, could one of you please just give our audience your take on our current strategic landscape or the times in which we live?
Yeah, I can start with that briefly, John, and then I'm going to defer to Janis for a different lens of which I do not touch, and that's why it's great to have him here with me. So the current strategic landscape in specific as it relates to looking at nation states and other types of threats that may employ artificial intelligence to achieve their means is there's a little bit of an overemphasis in terms of arguably the potential and the use of it, to achieve these ends. But there's clearly a shift that is favoring automation in terms of data decision making, in terms of process preferences, and likewise, importantly, how to assess success versus failure of traditional methods, either kinetic, non-kinetic, since we're talking about this from a Department of Defense perspective in particular. So I mentioned that there's an arguable overemphasis on it. That would mean either the likelihood of it creating an effect or an impact that we can't control, or at minimum dismissing it entirely, which is something that is the other option, where we just say it's automation and forget about the second and third order effects. And so you'll see that a little bit in the blog. And the reason why we're here is for this specific purpose, is to kind of provide a little bit more of it from two different ends of the spectrum. Myself more on the research side, Janis more on the creative marketing and advertising side, to provide some overview of what this strategic shift is. So as mentioned, I really don't have the pedigree that Janis has in the marketing and advertising space, but in speaking with him and working with him, there's obviously been an adoption and embrace, if you will, of AI in this space. So I'll defer to you, Janis, to provide some insight on how you see it in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I think from a more commercial setting, data and AI is definitely a competitive edge that a lot of companies are going after. When you're competing, when you're going after margin, pretty much anything that you can use, you'll use. And marketing these days is moving a little bit away, or actually a lot away, from this Mad Men style of drinking martinis and creative creation, and more towards data-driven decision. Who has more data about their customers? Who has more data about the different touch points? Who has more data about decisions? and how you drive users through this concept that we call user journey, essentially from awareness to adoption. So in a lot of spaces, marketing, creativity, comms is really becoming more similar to tech companies than actual creative companies.
Okay, yeah, interesting perspective there for sure. Perhaps we can start getting into your article just a little bit. And so could one of you talk about what you foresee as AI and automation's greatest likely impact on future Department of Defense missions?
Yeah, I'll jump on that. I think the one undeniable thing is definitely going to be speed. If you read, Defense One or really anything else, there's a lot of hype about JADC2 and AI ML in that space. I think there was a recent article and some papers I saw about large language models or LLMs being used for processing intelligence and summarizing concepts and being better for search. So, which, by the way, I think is a great idea, but there may be some hesitance there. But it's really just the ability to process data a lot faster. We have a lot of things coming at us, whether it's text, video, imagery, some multimodal capabilities, and we spend an inordinate amount of time just trying to figure out what's relevant to us, how do we aggregate it, what it actually means, and how do we make, and I love this term, and how do we make data-driven decisions from all of that? I think AI ML, especially as we get more down to personalized AI ML capabilities, where it starts learning what we need and what we look for in our day-to-day basis, it will take away a lot of the time-consuming tasks and allow us to focus on more complex decision-making that we need to do. If you think about it, like really to this day, we're mostly relying on Excel trackers, PowerPoints being shared around in SharePoint. There's relatively little AI adoption. There's a lot of discussion about it, how we could do it. There's a lot of demos and white conference rooms where it looks great, but it's still relatively low. But it is getting rolled out. We are starting to see AI systems for a variety of things. Some of it's getting pushed to the edge to more personalized decisions. So once that becomes more commonplace and we get more acceptance of it, pretty much everything we do, whether it's administrative, influence, combat, and kinetic, will become much, much faster at it, as we won't have to sort through the data, but just focus on the decision.
I see. It's so. Could one of you also describe what delivery platforms are we talking about? So we're talking about AI and influence and decision making and automation, but I mean, how is all of that being delivered ultimately to an individual or groups of individuals that are getting marketed to or getting influenced? Like, I don't know, just not to lead the question further, but like Facebook, right? Would Facebook be like the kind of platform where these kinds of campaigns would be delivered, and what other platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, Facebook's a great example. Facebook is definitely one of them, and Facebook already has a pretty robust system for programmatic advertising, and that encompasses a lot of things. That may be just rule-based automation, where somebody says, hey, I want to target this specific audience in a geographic region, and I set a budget. Or we may have a model make real-time decisions based upon feedback that it gets. So whether somebody scrolls over an ad, whether they hover over an ad, whether they look at it for longer than a second, we can get a variety of feedbacks. But pretty much anything that electrons touch these days, and often even in the physical space, can be delivery channels. So this is advertising within a website. There's affiliate. Think about even affiliate marketing and affiliate links to when you go on a platform, you see something that looks like it's written by an author. We can move towards programmatic there. Digital billboards, right? I laugh about connected fridges and IoT devices, but you can do TVs in gyms and connected treadmills and smart TVs. So pretty much anything where we can get an electron to can be part of that ecosystem. And a lot of times these days, especially in the last 2 years or so, you can also bid on physical space. So billboards, posters, etc., all across the world. So we can put physical physical displays across the world in similar programmatic markets where they're being bid out for comms purposes.
Yeah, John, another area
Yeah.
that I think is commonly ignored is the actual use of artificial intelligence and automation, not just necessarily based on the content, but the methodology that's associated with it. So you'll see it to create resonance. You'll see it embedded into other processes, either through an automation or a human-assisted mechanism to create magnification, false breadcrumbs, shifts in that are trying to literally impact the algorithms that Janis is referring to. So individuals for not necessarily always for bad guy reasons are employing automation to create desired end states of literally how the information is moving through the system, and to create instances where they're achieving some element, back to your original point, of a strategic advantage. And it's not just as we see often highlighted, artificial actors and things like, it's not really just that. It's what you're seeing more so is, as Janis was alluding to, much more intelligent understanding and usage and application of how to use automation in the overall information dissemination, absorption, assessment processes, to not only to create reach, but likewise to create some aspect of resonance that reside, within, and a target audience's common understanding of how information is shared. So the arguably the best use and potentially the greatest future near immediate use of it is these methods, and you're seeing that embrace, if you will, by everybody across the spectrum, not just in the commercial space, but everywhere where there's a desire to create some tangible effect, to use these. The other part that is not really often considered, and it's something Janis and I touched together in the Peraton setting, is the use of AI for, as I mentioned, assessment purposes. So it's the aggregation of data and the application of AI-driven capabilities to then create some element of a joint assessment. And it's some stuff I know, of course, John, you're familiar with, which is looking at commingling information that normally, that Janis mentioned, is used as maybe potentially connected, but not deliberately fused data sources to get a much better understanding of what a strategic landscape looks like. So that's really where you're seeing a lot of the growth and the maturation is not just the let's automate something to save time or to create reach. It's now you're looking at what are the actual gains in the communication process and the influence process that we're hoping to achieve.
All right. Wow. Okay. So do you guys have any sort of a estimate or thoughts on how enemies of the West, enemies of free societies, how are they either currently using AI, or where are they headed in the not too distant future that we need to be aware of?
Well, the obvious one is what Janis is talking about, and I'm going to defer back to him in a moment, and that's the creation of artificial actors, and also working with the hybrid approach of humans and automated individuals or automated network structure manipulation to create some effect. So what they're doing is they're either promulgating messages, trying to create resonance amongst those messages, try to reach individuals. We've seen instances as well of strategic use, that, if you will, by adversaries to manipulate the actual algorithms underlying search engine stacking. And I'm not even talking just about, as Janis was referring to, as in Facebook placement, but actually to create through a combination of not just hashtagging, but creating artificial environments that have some element of truth based on the layout of the information, the organization of it, and the interaction schemes, which then almost replaces other items from that information space. We see this a lot, actually, in not surprisingly from Russia. It's a preferred tactic of theirs to create that element of information disruption. It's something they've been doing for quite a long time. It's not new to the internet. But I wanted to defer back to Janis, because again, this is his sweet spot more than mine, on best practices on the application of artificial intelligence to reach target audiences. So one of the things that you asked about, John, is when anytime you talk about the use of peer competitors and whatnot. At the end of the day, it all does go back to target audiences, and good tradecraft is good tradecraft, be it commercial or otherwise. So Janis, what are your thoughts then from your end in terms of how maybe this tradecraft has shifted and where you see it, and some best practices, hopefully for good?
Yeah, Paul, thanks. You hit upon a lot of good things there, and I'm not actually quite sure where to start. There's absolutely the aspect of personas or bots or whatever you want to call them online, and having the capability to drive them through, really through LLMs and chat GPT type of models. I think that one's been talked about for quite a bit. Another big part that Paul alluded to is really a better understanding of the information space. So clearly, users, target audiences have a lot of touch points in the digital ecosystem, and physical as well. But if focusing purely on the digital, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's your web searches, there's blogs, there's local social media platforms. So users touch all of those, 1, 10,000 times every single day, and that makes up the information space. Using AI and machine learning, we can now get a much better understanding of how, when, where users actually touch those. So that's from the data emanating on them, that's from digital signatures that they leave behind. There's a lot of data that's being brought back. Automation, not so much quite AI ML, although it's moving in that space, but automation is really combining that into knowledge graphs or networks that allow us a better understanding how information flows and how users interact with them and for how long. So when adversaries work again, when we do it or our adversaries do it, we can just have a much better understanding of a target audience down to a very granular level. How much time and where do they spend on which website, which articles did they read, how did they interact with them, how were they shared online. And that leads into another interesting point is algorithmic influence, although that term is probably a little bit too dramatic, but there's definitely a variety of ways our adversaries have, and that you do also in the commercial space, that you can try to manipulate how you are ranked. And that can be search rankings within Google, right? I don't think I've been on the second page of Google in about a decade. That can be articles shared within Facebook, or a great example is typically YouTube. You click on some random YouTube link, and then YouTube says like, yeah, you do like knitting. I'm going to give you a lot of knitting videos, right? If we can get users to click on our content, platforms will start reinforcing our messaging or adversary messaging purely for their own gain because they think you're interested in it. So we get to these almost kind of synthetic echo chambers. As long as we can get you to click on things, other platforms and other models and other AI algorithms will reinforce that better behavior. And I think the last part there is the capability to have better decision and messaging. I think we talked about user journeys, but at the speed at which you get data for assessments and evaluations back today is incredibly fast, right? It doesn't replace traditional polling or some other concept, but you do get very granular user level data back very quickly. And that can be easily used to manipulate messaging, right? So do we get the perfect shade of blue, right? Maybe we can get slightly more eyes, and we get 5% more clicks or 0.5% more clicks if we change the color, if we change one word, if we insert something, if we make it a GIF instead of image or vice versa. We can figure out, maybe we should do Facebook in the morning and Twitter in the afternoon, whatever it may be. We can really do granular optimizations of all our campaigns. And we've seen that, we've seen that in commercial space. We've seen it definitely from adversaries. Hopefully that's what we're working at as well.
Wow. And presumably you guys can get all the way to continual improvement of your presentation of content, and all. I would also think that what tends to work today might be less effective tomorrow. I don't mean literally today versus tomorrow, but like what is working now may not be true next week. So that those colors you were just describing, Janis, like maybe a different shade of blue compared to yellow tends to get a little better, measures of engagement or something like that. But then, next month it could be completely the opposite for, reasons that are difficult to explain, other than people's ever evolving desires and habits online. Would you say that that's generally right?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. We can be very reactive to world events. We can be to changes in style and fashion. Style and fashion maybe not day to day, but month to month. But we can definitely be quick to world events. We can. The other thing is, we or our adversaries, since that's what we started with the question, can be very reactive to other messaging. So when we see, whether it's counter messaging, whether it's competitor messaging, whether it's some new offering or some new world event, we can step through that cycle of creative approvals, A/B testing, and ultimately putting users on this kind of very granular and changing and adaptive process very, very quickly. And you're right, and the process is adaptive as well. It's like we go through, what traditionally just called A/B testing. You can get a little bit fancier with them, but let's have a lot of versions and let's have a lot of concepts and test them on very small audiences, very specific audience, and see what works best. I mentioned that I love the term data-driven decision, but this is ultimately the data-driven decision. Sometimes it's an ego hit. Sometimes you think something's amazing and the data says the opposite. It can be a tough pill to swallow. That's what's slowing down AI adoption, is pride. But no, it's good, right?
Or falling into some fallacy of being like, I really like this. Me personally, I tend to engage in content that's more like this, but your target audience might have completely different ways of identifying engaging content. So what works for you personally has potentially very little to do with what your target audience might resonate with. So perhaps we can start going into one of the key portions of your article. And so you guys discuss two camps when it comes to AI adoption and implementation and automation, et cetera. Could one of you briefly describe these two camps, and how do you think that we should be addressing the skepticism or lack of understanding in these camps?
Yeah, I'll start with it, and then I'll defer to Janis on one of them in particular. The first is, it actually goes back to some of the stuff you guys have already covered off on, and so the first camp would be one of the fear of, that the article mentions, of a Skynet reality where AI replaces human decision making, and this goes back to some of the discussions that have been had in US DoD and were referenced in the paper, of the human in the loop versus the human on the loop. How much should a human be part of the data-driven decision-making process, as Janis pointed out too? So one camp is literally a fear of automation that goes rampant, which honestly is a bit silly, because automation can't go rampant. It will eventually break itself if it has enough data feeds, and it will not provide informed decisions. But that's why they're called camps. They're dichotomous. And they're extreme. The second is the complete and utter disregard for any form of risk in automation, and just say, let's just automate everything. And then, of course, garbage in, garbage out. You end up with something that doesn't make a lot of sense, because you're ignoring all of the risks inherent in it. And in both instances, what you're looking at is not really harnessing the abilities of AI to do what it can do, and understanding its strengths and also its limitations. So both camps are clear guideposts for what happens if you overemphasize automation in lieu of actually human decision making, and then conversely, if you underestimate it, out of fear that it cannot provide some element of context. So one of the things that I wanted to answering that question, I wanted to build on Janis's previous point. AI has a very potentially useful role in assessment, and that's something that Janis and I do pretty regularly for Peraton, and that is looking at the organization of data itself as part of the assessment process. So AI and ML through trained models machine learning that is, can do that element of provide that element of understanding by looking at data presentations, data configurations, do some data standardization. And so what Janis was talking about, and you were referencing, John, when colors can change and preferences, and Janis indicated if you get a false positive and you feel kind of silly, well, the AI can actually and should be, while all this is going on, providing some assessment of the landscape to get a sense of what is the shifts that are taking place versus not just the colors themselves, but in the overall data landscape of which those colors are tethered to, so you have some confidence in your outcomes that are there. So you'll see in that article that there is a little bit of disruption, if you will, within the U.S. Department of Defense in lack of understanding of the potential of AI. And Janis, from the commercial sector, I'll defer to you once more. You and I have talked about this, that there's a lot of opportunity to use this technology, not just again to create some automation, but actually to understand our target audiences better. And John, you referenced user journeys, and so I want to hand this back over to Janis to potentially go pull that thread a little bit on his end.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. A lot of thoughts on that. One of the things that needs to be mentioned is that we say AI ML, and it's not a monolithic thing that gets implemented that you just buy and install. It's not Norton or Microsoft Office. It's really a large combination of things of quality data labeling, developing models against very specific problem sets, running them in real time, validating their decisions, looking at their outputs, having some human in the loop type of processes in there, monitoring their performance from there on. And that's what we do in user journeys. That's part of assessments. So it's all an end-to-end integrated process. As far as it goes back to the camps, it's unfortunately a relatively complex process of a lot of pieces put together. There's tech, there's IT, there's networking, there's AI, there's data science, visualization, business intelligence, whatever you may call it. So there's a lot of things being put together. For either of those, I think what really can help is just implementing, like as Paul mentioned, some guideposts and some KPIs. Basically, what do you want out of this system, and how do you expect it to perform? We can't, one camp comes into it and saying like, that's it, we got Wall-E or a Terminator, and it's going to be great, but it's like a friendly Terminator. It's like a Wall-E Terminator. Another thing is like, that's it. It's going to take my job, and it's going to kick people out. So the reality is, it's large, it's complex, and it requires humans, as Paul mentioned, it requires humans to run, and we need to keep experimenting it and accept a little bit of risk and implement it, right, and push things forward, and just figure out what are you comfortable with. Back to the user journey stuff, like, yeah, we have a lot of things that are automated, but we still have a large creative team that comes up with their original concepts. They still come up with imagery, they still come up with text, they still come up with that emotional narrative. And then and then we go into marketplaces to place that content and see how it does and figure out the best one. So it's not rampant machines, but it's machines with humans working together. And that's really where we see performance. I think the fear is like AI is going to replace humans. I don't think that's true, but I think an AI or a human with AI will just replace just a human.
Right. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, and I think you just started touching on it a bit, Janis. But the whole concept of like human in the loop, and DoD policy when it comes to how humans are being part of the AI decision making. Do you think you could unpack that just a little bit more too?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think there's a lot of discussion and fear of rampant runaway AI decision making. And yet again, Paul mentions that most of the time AI will just break without humans in the loop anyways. It's not there to where it can just randomly do things on its own. There's definitely been concepts, and it's very hard to define very technical processes in a few words. So we have human in the loop, and that's mostly how we work these days. Is where we have some automated processes enabled by machine learning models to do optimize messaging, optimize our purchasing of content, identify which channels that we should be on, etc. But ultimately, a human makes decisions. A machine produces some COAs or some recommendations or does something, and a human oversees it and can stop it at any point in time. So, or often even make the decisions. It takes the outputs from the machine and makes some decisions. So that's, I'd say that's human in the loop. There are some more human, I think they call it on the loop, I think was the cool term these days. Mm-hmm. And that's really where we have more end-to-end processes and machines run automatically, and then a human can oversee them and make, jump in, correct, stop, change, whatever it may be. But really the end-to-end process is largely automated. We do, there's definitely systems like that, but it's not a monolithic capability where everything that you do is entirely human on the loop. It's typically there's some things that are human on the loop. So for example, in our purposes, when we do digital ad buys or real-time bidding markets, et cetera, for ad space on websites, apps, Facebook, whatever it may be, those things happen in hundredths of a second or a millisecond. So if you think about it, every time you load a page, all the ads and all the messaging in there is bid in real time. So as soon as you load the page, they say, hey, John's loading this page. Anybody want to advertise for him? There's no way a human can make a decision fast enough, right? So that's human on the loop, machine makes decision, but it's still guided by the human, right? So it's typically, a system of systems. Some are human in the loop, some are human on the loop based upon the problem set.
Yeah, there's an important distinction there too, and I want to go back more to the strategic discussion really quickly. What Janis was walking us there, it's how you are using the AI for what end purpose. So there's certain functions and certain tasks that are, I guess the easiest way of describing it from a U.S. Department of Defense perspective is the difference between offensive and defensive cyber. So if you were using AI, for instance, to provide cybersecurity protections and intrusion detection, and to execute protocols that are derived from artificial intelligence algorithms that locate a presence of a potential activity, actor, or combination of sorts, to them insert protective mechanisms and protection schemes. Almost everyone that is looking at AI would say that's okay, as long as there is continuous monitoring, back to Janis's point, at some level, to make sure that these models are doing what they're supposed to do. Now, if you ask these same people whether or not, once we've, other than eliminating the threat, meaning, creating protections against it and adjusting the system accordingly so it can't come in through those known vulnerability channels, no one's going to want you to then go out in most instances and then start targeting people and taking them out as a countermeasure, unless, again, it's removing capability. I think that's where the real question comes into play. In fact, most of the discussions for human on versus in deal with those type of activities where there's a fear that if you're doing something that does have an element of an offensive capability, that you're looking to automate that. I don't believe that, that anyone is really universally going to think that's a thing that we should consider right now as, just go in whole hog. In fact, what Janis was saying, we can even look at placement of messaging, again, deferring to his area of expertise. We don't want kids, for instance, to get messaging that's not appropriate for them through silly ad buys, even if they're in places they shouldn't be. I mean, I think most people would agree that if, Alice Leaves Wonderland, you don't want her to be getting messages that she should not be getting, because that is a seeming media preference, and then following her around and having that automated. So a lot of that discussion arguably does reside in the offensive versus defensive realm, and that really goes back to the two camps, John, that you've mentioned. One overemphasizes offensive and one overemphasizes defensive, and looks at protective mechanisms that may be required to compensate for either extreme end. I just wanted to throw that out there because I think that that's in many ways, the unspoken language in AI policy that's out there, and also a sister conversation, and Janis was referencing it too, and talking about user journeys, and likewise the potential to intelligently place in an automated fashion messaging to the right people. It's just an ignorance, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just an ignorance of how AI models work and are trained and refined, They're not all knowing, all powerful. There is some element of decision making that has a finite number of steps and pathways in there. I think once people get more used to it as part of their interaction on a daily basis, as Janis was mentioning with their technologies, I think we'll see a lot better and more purposeful, reasoned use of automation versus, hey, we can automate something.
Well, this has been a fantastic discussion, you guys. One last question about your article, and then we'll start closing it out. But could one of you talk a little bit about where and how you think AI can assist in the broader context of data sharing and interagency collaboration within the U.S. government?
Sure, I'll tackle this one, and I'll defer to Janis if there's something he wants to provide from his experiences in cross marketing purposes and in data sharing across different domains. But from the U.S. government and interagency perspective, the greatest obstacle that I often hear communicated to me, in particular in the areas that I touch, is literally the absence of true data sharing. So it's seen as a hindrance to creating either effective or most effective outcomes, creating really a true effect against an adversary, and likewise that have expedite the decision making that is needed to accomplish those goals. And normally, the reason why these occur, the culprit is, I've heard, is the authorities or the inability to provide a unified data picture that is of meaning. So AI isn't going to solve those problems in the sense of getting somebody, say, from Treasury to, by default, provide complex finance data to an agency that is looking at counter threat finance, for instance, as part of an overall adversary picture, and looking for an intersection between physical activities and information ones. But where AI can be applied is if you have systems and structures that by default are integrating information through automated processes and providing some level of data structuring. And then at that point in time, based on required and select authorities, they're providing aggregate assessment and some element of risk and threat prediction and creating better data pictures. And by default, integrating, exporting, importing a number of different data across hybrid cloud or other types of environments, you're going to just by default, you're going to get better outcomes and better decision-making, back to what Janis was referring to on data-driven decision-making, because you're looking at a much bigger picture. I'm quite positive, honestly, someone can be quite positive, that if you start combining more data and start structuring into meaningful pictures, by default, you will produce better knowledge and outcomes. And it's not just because that you're providing more data and throwing more things against the wall. The more lenses and on a prism that you put in a space, the better the picture of a target audience or a problem set will be. So AI can assist in that if there are mechanisms that are deliberately set up to enable information sharing, data structuring, some element of assessment across different data sets and sorts. Again, John, back to your area of expertise in entropy and pattern of life modeling, you've seen firsthand the benefits of this. Now imagine a world where we have automated types of assessments. Back to Janis's point on user journeys, where that user journey is not limited by a specific data set or scheme or structure within the commercial sector, but now is actually married to sister data sets and is creating some element of, but via AI, some data structuring and some, not just visualization, but some base level analysis to identify threats, risk, and opportunity. You've got a big winner there. The other option too in this process is, this goes back to human on the loop and human in the loop, is if some of those findings are then exported to a more classified environment and then provide additional assessments almost in a semi-automated but appropriate fashion. So then you're creating efficiencies and you're using the AI to generate that, which would otherwise take thousands of manpower hours. Back to Janis's point, you can't track a human every step of the way. If you do, that's kind of creepy if you're following them around, either digitally or otherwise. So that's John, that's just a mechanism, pun intended, of displaying how interagency collaboration across the U.S. government can be leveraged, can leverage rather AI to create a lot of the gains that may seem as unattainable due to policy or other restrictions. But again, I want to defer to Janis from a market and commercial perspective, because I mean, that's what they do. They're looking at multiple data sources and trying to provide rich outcomes to their audience.
Paul, that was really great. I don't know if I have much to add. That's really what it's about. More data, aggregate it, understand it faster. That's what it is in the commercial space, and I think there isn't that much change for in the government.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you guys for unpacking at a relatively high level, but what is a very complex component of larger apparatus of influence and engaging productively in the world. And I guess to be continued. This is a very live discussion, obviously, within the national security community as to how to ethically, properly, safely employ AI in order to assist with these projects. So perhaps we can do a quick lightning round, fellas, and then close out. So lightning round, 30 seconds to a minute or so per response, and then a couple of typical closeout questions. So whoever wants to jump on these, go for it. And if you don't have any strong thoughts, then you can pass. So first lightning round, complex systems.
I'll defer to Janis.
Pass. Okay.
Thanks. I'll say it's where machines make sequential decisions, basically where one model makes a decision and passes it on to the next one to feed into it to impact its decision.
Okay. Second lightning round. A friend sent an article to me a couple of months ago where they discuss the possibility that information itself has properties that are similar to fluids. So imagine information being like an ocean, right? And you've got ripples on the ocean, et cetera. And so there's like fluid dynamic properties of information. So would love to get either one of your hot take on that notion about information having fluid properties.
Oh, I got this one. Easy day. I like to make the argument many times over that content is a lot less important than context, because information moves naturally through a system that is native to that social media platform that you guys talked about, and likewise that is normal human communication on a particular type of topic for particular groups. And by the way, that's fluid dynamics in a nutshell. So if you're looking at how information moves through a system, I think it's also important to understand the system itself in isolation of the content, where the content can act as a mediator for the types of effects you're generating. Again, much like fluid dynamics, where certain types of stimulus into the system will change how that moves, but there are known knowns of which information in a system should be looked at that, and AI can provide better understanding of that through models that are meant to represent that.
All right, excellent. And last lightning round. Excruciating trade-offs.
Paul got the last one, thank goodness, because I had no idea there. I'll say, and we mentioned earlier, I think speed and comfort. We can be really fast at building things and implementing things, or we can feel comfortable. And I think it's almost a 1-for-1 trade. It's like the faster we go, the more nervous we'll be.
Like
I'll add 3 words, John: confidence and control as well into that.
Yeah, that's good.
Right, like sprinting with scissors, for example.
Yeah.
The faster you go, the more dangerous it gets. Yeah.
That's
okay.
your new book, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, coming this fall. Okay, well, fantastic, guys. So a couple closeout questions. We have a lot of students and researchers who listen to this podcast. Could one of you offer a fruitful research question that someone can take a crack at that will help advance our knowledge in this area?
Yeah, I want to build on what you asked in the lightning round. I'm not going to go full fluid dynamics, but I would like to challenge individuals to look better and more, if you will, at the actual nature of human communication. There's been a lot of inquiries that flirt with application of social psychology or mass communication theories. In fact, I always tell folks when they're looking at this problem set or they're considering the use of artificial intelligence to look at something very, very simple, which is now about 60 years old, which is Marshall McLuhan, Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man, as an example of the book, and talking about the medium is the message. So I would encourage individuals when they're looking at this phenomenon AI, back to your lightning round question and Janis's response to the previous one, to then start looking at what actual theories that are validated in other areas apply to these settings, and then how you can justify what decision making that you're recommending or making, either from a practical perspective or from a research perspective, and not be so wedded to your content, but actually take a better look at that. And by the way, the McLuhan piece indicates exactly that. Janis said it earlier. It's that the actual platform will ultimately determine the rules of engagement through its strengths and limitations, and to not be so wedded to that. So I kind of answered your question, John, with another question, but that is, or literally, like I'd like individuals to not be so wedded to perceived potential or fear of an automated technology, and likewise overemphasis on content, but actually take a step back. And little did you know your fluid dynamics question was that good. I found that I think it begins and ends there many times in the research space. Back over to you, Janis.
Thanks. Yeah, it's 2023 and generative AI is the hot topic these days, and I'm definitely not above jumping on, chasing the shiny ball these days. One of the things, and this is probably not a very well formulated question, but recently working with ChatGPT becoming available through API, Bard, and then Palm coming out from Google, which looks very impressive in early trials. I'm wondering if LLMs can actually craft emotionally resonant content, and whether they can do it better than humans, or at least on par. Probably not, but it'd be an interesting experiment.
Excellent. All right, fantastic. And the last question is, could one of you recommend a book or other online resource that is related to the kinds of things that we've been talking about that an interested audience member might check out if they want a deeper dive into this topic?
Yeah, I have one. If you're at all interested in programmatic advertising in the ecosystem and what data is available where, and as Paul mentions, like about the platforms and how we can engage with each one, there's a book called Introduction to Programmatic Advertising. So very on the nose type of name, by Dominic, and I hope I don't butcher this last name, Kasorin. They had a recent volume come out last year to deal with kind of the death of third-party cookies. It's not technical. It's very easily accessible. Explains everything pretty well, and it's a compact read at just over 100 pages. I want to say just a little bit. So it's slightly above a pamphlet. Just made it into a book.
All right, excellent. Well, you guys have given us a lot to think about, obviously, and as I mentioned before, a very live, evolving, fast-moving area of interest for our national security community. And with that, Paul Lieber and Janis Butkevics, thank you both for being guests on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.